All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm seeing the attendees number going up. Wonderful. Let's just give it 30 seconds or so and then we start. So if you still need to, you can grab a coffee or a drink and then we start in about a minute. All right, let us start. It is 1 minute past 3. So thank you everybody for joining this webinar. We titled it Strengthening Cybersecurity with NIS2 Compliance. And today we are with 3 people here that are going to present. Myself, I'm Jethro Wils, and I'm active at SecWise as a cybersecurity advisor. I will do the first part of the presentation all about NIS2 compliance. What is it? Why is it important? And then we have my colleague Thibaut. He will take the second half of the presentation where we more dive into the technological stack from Microsoft, how that technology can help you achieve part of NIS2 compliance. And also present today is Bert, and Bert will do the moderation of the Q&A and also keep everything on track during the session. So with that said, just a couple of topics, the agenda for today. I'm going to share with you the what and why of NIS2. Then I'm going to share with you some best practices that we're applying here at SecWise to build a proactive NIS2 strategy. And those elements you can copy paste in your own organization. And then Thibaut will take over with the technological solutions. And also we have a customer case where we explain how we did this at a customer. And then at the end, Bert will moderate the Q&A. Now, with that said, some practical housekeeping. So first of all, feel free to use the Q&A. So at the top, you should see a button Q&A next to chat. And there, feel free to ask any question you have relating to the topic. I think you have the option to either make it public or private. Anyway, Bert will then be able to moderate that. And also other people, if it's a public question, you can upvote it using the like. And at the end, we will use that sort to start with the most popular questions. Also, all the slides you're going to get today, you're going to see today, you will receive from us via email in the next few days. And like I mentioned, there's going to be a live Q&A at the end. So if there are many questions, the ones that we cannot handle due to time, we will then answer via email, so you will get your answer. And if it's a pertinent question, then Bert will flag it and I will actually answer it during the presentation. Great. So thank you everybody for joining. With that said, let's start into chapter 1, the NIS2 key requirements and impact. So just for some context, everybody's talking about NIS2. You see it all over the place. You see it on LinkedIn all over the place. So what is it and why is it important? Well, before we answer that question, it's good to take one step back and take a look at what Europe is doing. So NIS2 is not an isolated thing. It is part of a program of how to improve the cybersecurity or cyber resilience in Europe. And when I give the NIS2 Foundation training, I always start with what happened in Estonia in 2006, 2007, where they were hit by a severe cyber attack that disrupted the society and economy. Banks were down, they could not get cash from the banks, transportation was down. So that was basically the wake-up call for Europe, and that was basically the message stating cybersecurity is social and economic security. Because these days, what is it, like 20 years later, it's even more the truth. Cybersecurity is not only business security, but also economic and social stability, right? And so then Europe kicked into action with a program on let's increase the resilience of the European cybersecurity. And that's why you have these different topics that they then published. So Europe in 2013, the EU published this vision statement, this vision document about an open, safe, and secure cyberspace, right? And then in 2015, they came out with the PSD2, the Payment Service Directive, which was basically open banking and making sure that the financial transactions and the banking apps belong to you and not to the bank. So you can basically export them and use them for other open banking apps. And then in 2016, the first version of NIS came out, NIS Directive 1. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then 2020, we have this cybersecurity strategy for the digital decade, another vision document from Europe, like where are we headed by 2030? Where do we plant a flag on cybersecurity? And then in 2022, NIS2 directive was published, which we'll talk about today, of course. And then in 2023, ENISA, which is the European Cybersecurity Agency, they also came with a governance framework for national cybersecurity strategies. And you say, Jetro, what's that all about? Basically, when you take a look at the NIS2 directive, I would say half of all the articles are not for organizations. They are for the member states of Europe. And so they want each member state, I think we are like 27 member states of the EU, that all of them work together in case of a cyber incident. And so that's why ENISA provides this framework for how should member states communicate with other member states and what are their roles and responsibilities. So that's the governance framework for a national cybersecurity strategy, right? Okay, we're not going into details on that because today it's about us, our organizations, and our businesses. Now, if you take a look at the NIS2 timeline then, so zooming in on the NIS timeline, it came into effect in January 2023. Now you say, Jetro, we're already 2025, what's going on? And that is because there's always a time between when the law or the directive gets published, and then it takes some time before it really gets into effect because organizations need to prepare, member states need to prepare, and that's why there is what they call a period to have that implementation. But actually, NIS2 came into full force last year. I believe it was October last year. And now we are in early, let's say, 2025. And so the member states of the European Union by April need to give a list of all the essential and important entities. So the member states collect all those important and essential entities or organizations and give that list to Europe so that Europe knows where are these critical companies. And it's also expected that in 2 years, in 27, there will be a revision of NIS2, like an update, like a bit of agile philosophy here, but on agile on European terms, like every 3 years, an update of the regulation based on the feedback from the market. So there's going to be a NIS3 that is going to be in effect or being created. Now you say, okay, that's all nice, but what is the NIS2 directive? And I like to chop it down, break it down into the key concepts. So let's take a look. NIS2 directive. So number one, NIS stands for Network and Information Security. So it's all about protecting network and communication infrastructure. And it's also all about information security. Right? And if you read on the information security, it's always the CIA, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of information. And so NIS is all about that cyber domain, right? Networks and communication and the information that travels through it, right? Yes, it also has impact on people and how organizations should prepare for these things, but it's a information security focus. Right? 2, like I mentioned, it's version 2, because there were some issues with the first version. It came into force in 2016, and now a couple of years later, we see the effects. And basically, there were 3 shortcomings of that first version. First of all, there were inconsistent implementations across the EU. You can imagine 27 member states, they all, tweak it and tune it a bit different. So there were inconsistencies. Also, the threat landscape at the time was too narrowly defined in NIS1, and so NIS2 expands the threat landscape. And then shortcoming 3 was there were actually gaps in enforcement and compliance. So basically, there was not a real enforcement mechanism with NIS. It was kind of optional, and you had to opt in, right, to say, I will be part of NIS. And so with NIS2, it is now mandatory, right? There is no choice. You have to check if in which scale or which level you are, and then you have to comply. And it's a directive, by the way, which is different from GDPR. GDPR was a regulation, because there are two types. Every act that Europe publishes has two, is one or the other. It's either a directive or it's a regulation. And with a directive, it basically sets the outcomes or the objectives, but each member state still has to, we call it transpose, you could say, adopt the directive into national law. And that's why it can take some time, and there are different speeds in Europe. Right? So a directive you have to transpose into national law, which gives the benefit that each country can tweak it a little bit based on its priorities or based on its culture, right? While a regulation is a binding law, and you have to take it as is. You cannot tweak it and change it, right? So DORA, for example, the Digital Resilience Act, is a regulation. GDPR is a regulation. You just have to say, we copy it and that's it. Well, with NIS, it's a directive. There is some transposition or some flexibility there. Now, if you take a look at Europe, and this is the last dashboard I found from October last year, you can see that there are, let's say, 4 levels of maturity in adopting NIS on NIS2 on a national level. From level 1, like basically we still have to start as a member state, all the way to level 4, which is the law has been approved, right? Completely transposed. Everything is written and published. And as you can see, we in Belgium, we are level 4. We're one of the first and top of class and when it comes to NIS2 in Europe. I know from the Netherlands, for example, they are now still in the process of adopting it or transposing it, and it should kick in to national law in 6 months, right? But therefore, actually not getting the deadline, right? So Europe is working in 2-3 speeds, and we're top of class. So that's great. Now you say, okay, then the NIS2 directive in one line, it is basically the European Union's legislation to enhance cybersecurity across critical sectors, right? And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So it's the cybersecurity baseline across the Union. And remember, it has been triggered by what happened in Estonia, right, in 2006-7. Now, what are the objectives, right? If I now, for a moment, just take one step back and look at the NIS2 Act, let's say, what are the 3 main objectives? Number 1, we want to enhance cyber resilience of the EU businesses, and that's what Europe wants. Now, cyber resilience is different from cyber security, right? Cyber resilience means if you get punched in the face and knocked down, how fast can you get back up on your feet and continue, right? So it is in Dutch, veerkracht. You want to anticipate attacks and incidents. So it's not a matter of can we avoid them altogether? It's a matter of when it happens, how fast can we get back into business? Right? That's the resilience part. Also, on the second objective, we want to standardize these security incident reporting across member states, right? So that each member state reports incidents in a similar way with a similar terminology, the same vocabulary, right? Because in this one, it was all like scattered and it was not streamlined. Right? And third, very important from a European perspective, Europe wants to boost cooperation and crisis management, right? When the cyber threat happens and we need to respond, it needs to be in a cooperative way. So that's why half of the NIS2 legislation is for member states. Right? You're like, what you're reading is like, what does this has to do with us as an organization? Nothing. It's all about how member states should work together and share information and proactively defend each other. Right? So that's very important within this too. Keep that in mind. All right. So if you would then tag it, first has to do with mindset. NIS2 wants to have a mindset in Europe of cyber resilience. Every client we talk to as SecWise, cyber resilient. And not cyber security, it's resilience. Right? You cannot be 100% secure. You have to be resilient. Right? And pre-incident, so the standardization is all about pre-incident and preparing. What are the communication lines across member states? And then the boost cooperation is also during the incident, right? So we have to change the mindset to cyber resilience. We want to prepare our communication lines and our procedures in case of the incident. And then during the incident, we're not alone. We can work together. That's all on member state level. Now, you say, yeah, that's all great, but what is in scope, right? Looking at NIS2. And if you simplify it, there are three things we have to work on as an organization, right? We have to work on risk management, incident reporting, and supply chain security, right? So risk management, it's all about, continuous looking and evaluating information security risks. Right? So NIS2 is not a one-shot project. It is instilling or implementing the mindset in an organization of continuous awareness and risk assessment on cybersecurity, right? So it is continuously looking at what are the weaknesses, what are the vulnerabilities, what are my risks, evaluating those risks, making an action plan in the organization, and then implementing that action plan. So that could be, for example, in our organization, we still have not 100% multi-factor authentication for our users, right? Or we're still not having the right backup strategy, right? Or we have still legacy devices with no longer supported operating systems, right? Each of these risks could become a mini project or a project under the NIS2 umbrella, right? So NIS2, when I talk to customers, I say it is the skeleton, it's actually the spine, the backbone of your cybersecurity program, and it's going to attach a lot of projects next to it. So actually you want that all your IT security projects can be attached to NIS2, right? That's the idea, risk management, right? Also meaning implementing policies. You have to write down policies, right? Then we have incident reporting. So when an incident happens, a cyber incident, you have to communicate that to the national authorities. Now in Belgium, it's the CCB, the Cybersecurity Center Belgium. In Netherlands, I believe the NCSC. So every country has one national authority for cybersecurity. And when an incident happens, you have to report. You have to notify them within 24 hours of detecting the incident. And then you have to do a follow-up reporting 72 hours later after discovering the incident. And then within 30 days of closing and finalizing that incident, let's say, you have to give a final report to the national authorities. Now, why is that? If you think about the European philosophy, these member states with their national authorities, they want to know if your company is under attack or has an incident and they're getting input from other organizations as well, they can see, wait a minute, this is not just an isolated thing, this is nationwide. And then they will liaison with other member states and check, are you having a similar cyber attack or incidents? Yes, okay. And then it escalates from organization to member state to European level, right? And they'll kick in with their own resources to mitigate and respond to the incident, right? But it starts with us. I mean, we are the businesses, right? So we get attacked or we get the incident, we have to notify, in our case in Belgium, the CCB, right? And then another key pillar of NIS2 is supply chain security, right? So in contrast with things like ISO 27001, which mainly focus on the organization itself. Yes, there is a control looking at suppliers, but in NIS2, it's really a core focus. You and your organization do not exist on an island. You do not exist in a vacuum. You have suppliers and you deliver goods and services to your customers. Therefore, that's the supply chain. There is an ecosystem, meaning if you have an incident and you're down, your customers are going to suffer, right? And if your critical suppliers are having a downtime, and it takes a week for them to recover. Let's say it's a malware or it's ransomware. It takes them a week or 2 weeks to recover. That means you won't get any services from them for 2 weeks, right? And if that puts you in a difficult spot, that maybe has a cascading effect down the supply chain, right? And so NIS2 says you have to also put some controls and expectations on your critical suppliers, supply chain security, right? By the way, if you have questions, please add them to the Q&A, so feel free. All right, now, of course, if you say Yetro, that's all great, but we have 27 member states, hundreds and thousands of organizations, entities, it's called, because it's not only a business, but can also be part of the government, so entities. Are they all treated the same way? No, there are two classifications, right? And that's either you're an essential entity or an important, or you're out of scope, right? Those are the only three options that there are. You're either out of scope or you're in scope, and then it's either essential or important. And as the name says, essential has even more stricter controls than in an important organization. Now, the CCB Belgium, we are top of class in the European Union, so they have great materials, safephoneweb.be, and I checked with them, and these, let's say, diagrams, you can apply them across Europe, right? It's not Belgium specific, right? So you take a look at your sector, you take a look at the size of your organization, right? Is it medium-sized or large? And those parameters are clearly defined in NIS2. And then you know I'm essential or important. Right? That's how you can scope it. Same thing in Annex 2, which is an appendix to the NIS2 directive. It also lists critical sectors that you also have to, I mean, if you're in one of these, you're also important, or if identified. Sometimes there are very small players, so less than 50 people, but the government has appointed that organization as a critical supplier, right? I'm just saying something. If you are a supplier that provides ingredients or raw materials to print the money, right? Even though you can be less than 50 people, the government will say you are, for us, an essential supplier. So that means only if identified, right? Even if you're a small or micro enterprise. Think about, what was it, Telegram, for example, was it Signal, one of the two? I read today that they're only with 30 people, right? And they're serving billions of users worldwide. So even though, according to NIS2, 30 people is a small enterprise, you could say it's critical communication, right? So then they are appointed as essential or important. But most of them, we are either important or essential. Now, what are the benefits? You say, Eto, this sounds complex. This sounds a lot of work for an organization. Why should we do this? What are the benefits, right? So in essence, there are three main benefits: improved security, regulatory alignment, and reputation management, right? So of course, if you apply NIS2, it really is common sense when you read the controls, especially for the important class, let's say the least strict, like common sense controls. There are still way too many organizations that are like cybersecurity maturity baby, right? And NIS2 basically says, guys, you gotta be able to walk and stand on your own feet. So you have to raise the maturity level, and by doing that, you improve your security posture, right? So effectively improving that. Yes, Bert, go ahead.
We have a question. Is this only for companies like educational and like universities, or?
What exactly, the NIS2, you mean?
Yeah, I think he meant the NIS2, yeah.
No.
It's only for... Is this only for companies or also education institutes like universities? That's the question.
Okay, great. I don't know by heart, but every entity in Europe, including universities, need to take a look at what's my sector and then see if I'm listed there, and then if I'm in that sector, what is my size. So it's a bit too small for me now to see, but education, I don't know by heart if it's there, but we'll take a note of it and then come back. Okay, great question. By the way, um, these models are on the CCB website, so you can also take a look there. Great. Now, so I mentioned already improved security, clear. So really by applying NIS2, you are increasing the maturity of your cybersecurity. Yeah, it is really like that. Um, Also, regulatory alignment, of course, being in Europe, lots of regulations, and also there is the carrot, which is improved security. And there is the stick, which is fines, so that's there. And then reputation management, right? If you are actively pursuing a NIS2 certification, I mean, you're actively building up your competence, you can show that also to your customers and to your potential new customers, like a certification, like a badge, like I'm actively working on NIS2. It shows a commitment, right? And seeing cybersecurity as essential to your organization. Right. So those are the three benefits: security, compliance, and reputation. All right. So now you say, Yetro, that's all nice. What are your thoughts on this too? I am not the I'm speaking in personal name now. I'm not always in favor of strong and strict regulations. I believe in freedom and innovation, but I must say NIS2 is really common sense. In my opinion, I don't see any overreach and heavy bureaucratic, stuff. When you read NIS2, from an information security point of view, it is common sense. Right? We should have been there already 10 years ago. Right? So in my opinion, NIS2 sets a common benchmark or baseline on cybersecurity across the union, which is good, right? And collaboration increases. So I think this one is a great example of regulation. Okay. Now, with that said, that's the what and why of NIS2, right? So now let's take a look at creating a proactive NIS2 strategy, and this is going a bit faster here. So you say, Yetro, okay, I understand. My organization is essential or it's important. How do you start with all of this? It is so huge and so massive, right? So at SecWise, we have a NIS2 project methodology, which I'm happy to share. So we work in four phases, right? First, we do when we start the NIS2, there is a preparation phase. Then there is the risk management phase. Then there is the phase of effectively implementing and improving business continuity and cybersecurity. And then last phase is maintenance and continuous improvement, right? And then we have these 16 activities across these four phases that you have to work on, right? I'm not going through all of these right now, but it also starts with a gap analysis. Where are we today? What's the standard? What's the gap? And then you start building up a roadmap. Very important, risk management, right? This is a function that should be embedded into your organization. So I'm dealing with a couple of clients now, helping them implement NIS2. And it's in a project team, right? And a project has a start and end date. So I say, let's imagine in 2 years, this project team is dissolved because we implemented NIS2. What part of the organization will continue to monitor the cybersecurity risks, right? That is very important. And that part has to do risk management continuously, right? That's also part of the maintenance and continuous improvement. So NIS2 is not a one-shot thing, right? It is a continuous function in an organization. Right? It's the mindset of cybersecurity. All right. Now you say, Yetro, but wait a minute, how can we implement NIS2? Right? It's great to know what and why, and it's nice to see there is like a methodology, but how can we implement it? Right? And so for that in Belgium, there are two ways to do this, right? Either you go with the ISO 27001 route, or you go for the cyber fundamentals framework of the CCB, right? And so either one is good. Now, remember, I told you that every member state has to transpose the directive into into national law, when they transpose, they also have to state how you can become NIS2 compliant, right? And so in Belgium, we have the two options. It's very possible that Luxembourg or the Netherlands will have only ISO or will have something else instead of the cyber fundamentals. I mean, every member state can choose, right? But when it is defined in the law, you have these ways to get there. In Belgium, it's these two ways. Okay. Now you say, Jetro, I'm hearing a lot about this cyber fundamentals framework from the CCB. It's really nice. It's really good. It was basically, I wouldn't say copy, but yeah, it initially was a copy from the NIST, which is the US ENISA, let's say, the US based institute that manages all the economic standards, right? And they have a standard on cybersecurity, the cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF. And what our CCB did was they took a copy of that and then they added a lot of extra controls and make it really practical to use. Right? So that's the Cyber Fundamentals framework. And it has these 5 domains: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, which basically says, dear entity, dear organization, you have to walk through each of these 5 phases and then do all these sub activities, right? Under each activity, there are controls, and based on if you are an essential or an important, you have more or less controls you need to install and implement. Right. Now you say, Jetro, do we need to install and implement all of these controls before we can be NIS2 certified, like in 2 years? By 27 is the deadline. No, NIS2 does not demand you to have all of this implemented. What NIS2 wants is that you have the governance implemented in the organization, that you're able to continuously improve your cybersecurity. Right? So it's not about having all the controls installed and implemented. It's about having the governance, the management system in place. Right? That's what the auditor will look for. Right? It's fine to have a backlog of 100 security projects as long as there is a system in place that continuously does risk assessments, update the roadmap, and it gets installed step by step. Okay, so that's the whole idea. Now at SecWise, what we do is we work in 3 steps. First of all, we do a NIS2 assessment. So you say, hey, we need some help here. SecWise, can you join and do an assessment? Right? It takes 2-3 weeks, give or take. And then you have a roadmap. You know exactly your strengths and weaknesses. It's a fit gap analysis. And then we make a nice plan that you can follow. Then we do implementation. So it's great to have a design, a plan. Now you need to implement it. And some customers say, can you help us? Or can you do it completely for us? You know, it's a co-creation thing. That's implementation. And like I mentioned, those tracks can be long, right? A year or 2 years, depending on the size and complexity of the organization. And then afterwards, of course, there are support services. We provide 24/7 SOC, Security Operations Center activities. We provide training and advice, and we also provide ad hoc security support. Like if you have a question, you can raise a ticket and we'll answer that for you. Right? So that's continuous support. Now you say that's all nice. How does it look like when we're doing this assessment? Here is an example from a report. You have those domains, like I told you earlier, from the CyFun, right? All these subdomains, and then the spider chart or the radar map that shows you how strong you are in specific areas. Target score like this, for example, you see that in this case, this customer has only a few domains that reach the target. All the rest is beneath the target, right? Which is typical for any organization I've seen. Cybersecurity maturity very low, right? So they get a shock initially, like, oh, I'm scoring this bad. Yes. So now let's work on this. Right? When I say, what I say to my customers is I always take a look at the 2 dimensions. So NIS2 looks at 2 things: documentation, implementation. You need to have governance and policies written down and communicated. And then you need, of course, to start implementing the controls. And when you combine those 2, you have 4 stereotypes or 4, what do you call this, personas of organizations, right? And so if you are high on implementation but low on documentation, you are the action hero. Your team is working, but they don't have the legal framework or they don't have a governance framework. They're just doing their best to secure the place. Yes, Bert.
Yes, we have a new question. So the requirements is to have a management system at the previous slide and not to implement the siphon controls. So why is there a minimal score in siphon?
Yeah. So the whole point is, of course, you need to implement the controls. That's the whole point. And the management system needs to function well so that also makes sure that those controls get implemented. What I'm saying is to get certified, if you are an essential or an important entity, you need to have a number of minimum controls implemented. Otherwise, you're very vulnerable. But even though your roadmap is more than that, because you're going to have more risks, right? And more things you need to cover. It's okay if you still have a backlog of projects that you are working on or will work on, right? But you need a minimum of controls implemented. That's correct. But probably you'll have even more projects, and it's okay to have a backlog as long as you can prove to the auditor that you have a good management system. So thanks for that question. And then, of course, if you are low on documentation and low on implementation, you're the ghost. Like there's nothing, right? I also have or see customers that have lots of documentation but nothing implemented. So it's the paper tiger, all the policies and huge documents full of paper. Nobody reads them, right? It's a paper tiger. Or you have both. You are having good implementation, good documentation. You're the role model. Typically, what I see, most companies are in this quadrant. Their IT team is doing the best they can, but there's no governance around them. So low on doc, but high on imp. So that's action heroes, right? So NIS2 says you need both, right? So here are, to wrap up my part, here are 3 real life examples of the NIS2 assessments, right? I made them anonymous, of course, but these are the real reports. This one was a client in the government, Belgian government. I won't say which level. And there we basically said like, okay, if you see here, these are the pain points, right? You need to have a incident process. You need to have a CISO basically that takes up all of these things. And you need to implement a formal policy and write it down, right? What's the policy on ransomware? Do we pay the ransom? Yes or no? What's our policy on training of essential and critical roles, right, in the company, right? These things you need to write down. Um, yeah. Second example of manufacturing. Again, what you see here is there was no logging and no visibility of all the logs and all the events. So then basically you're blind. And then a third customer, which is in healthcare, smaller healthcare provider. Once again, there was no centralized logging and threat detection. They were basically blind. And there was no incident response plan at all, not even written down, and definitely not trained. Like the fire drill every quarter, fire drill in the organization. We all walk to the place of evacuation. There was nothing there, right? So something that always comes back is the need for centralized logging and then analysis, right? So in the detect domain of the cyber fundamentals, you need to be able to detect anomalies and potential threats, right? If you don't have any logging and you don't have any analysis, you're blind, right? And that is actually one of the biggest points we want to give to you, like what's up with your logging and analysis there, right? And with that said, I'm going to give the word to Thibaut, who will take a look at the technological solutions. Take it away, Thibaut.
Yes, thank you very much. So indeed, we will go a little bit more technical now. First of all, I want to show you real quick. We have a focus on Microsoft tooling, of course. So I want to show you real quick what Microsoft tooling helps for certain NIS2 principles. Generally, data related to go more to a purview. If you go more governance, we have more security posture, intra-ID. But indeed, the thing we want to focus most on today is the security monitoring here for Microsoft Sentinel. And as you can see, for a lot of the parts, there are a lot of Defender parts coming back. And that is why we will look a little bit onto the Defender XDR stack as well. But first of all, why is defense so difficult today? Why do we need NIS2? Why do we need these toolings? Generally, if you look at this typical human-operated ransomware campaign, it all starts in one domain through email, through a phishing mail that comes in. It goes on to the next by deploying some payload like a malware or something else on your endpoint with communication to command and control. So now you are on your endpoint. Then further on, we'll go to privilege escalation. A certain user is getting compromised. They try to get more and more rights. Then suddenly you're in the identities domain, and you end in the workload domain when suddenly all your files are encrypted. As you can see, a lot of different domains, and there are a lot of companies and environments with a lot of different tools to try to catch these domains. But that is at the moment a little bit of a problem, because it's not uncommon for enterprise to have more than 45 cybersecurity tools and gets a lot. So as you can see here, they're getting more and more portals for every single domain or every single tool. It gets a lot more difficult for security teams to correlate alerts to see which have something to do with each other and which don't. But most importantly, it's just getting too much. So we can all solve this with a SIEM, Security Information and Event Management, which centralizes all the data and makes sure you can get to one single portal. So what is also very important to up our defenses is to strengthen your security posture. First and foremost, we want to prevent attacks. We want to make sure attackers have as little resources as possible to get into your environment. Now, as said earlier, nobody is perfect. There's always a way to get through. In that case, we want to detect and disrupt threats in near real time, so as quickly as possible. If it's taking too long by too many different tools, it's way more difficult to clean up everything and you might miss stuff. And then at the end, we also want to empower defenders and streamline security operations, because it's getting more difficult for your security team to find and correlate everything. So in the end, you want to make it as easy for them as possible so they can go and work as fast as possible. So now we're going to look at why AC, or in this case, Microsoft Sentinel. It's because you can get every single of your security tools, every single data you have in your environment, think identities, think endpoint logs, everything. We can all send them to one system, in this case, Sentinel. Foremost, it also adds stuff, like it also adds threat intelligence. So your alerts, your data will get more enriched, and it will more be easier to spot, for example, malicious IPs. You can also do some proactive threat hunting. There are analytic rules that will make sure certain things get detected, more and more user behavior. So it grants a lot more visibility. It makes it a lot more easy. It's a lot more easier to look at your alerts and aggregate and correlate them all into one system. Now, XDR is also a term you have heard a lot, the extended detection response. But why do we want an XDR and not an EDR? Why don't we just want an endpoint detection response? Basically, an endpoint detection response only detects stuff on your endpoints. It is very siloed. If something happens on your identities, you won't see it in your EDR. It's way too small in the way that attacks are so complicated right now. So that's why we want to go to an XDR, because it connects, correlates data across different domains. Like the XDR will also grab your, for example, data from your emails, from your identities. And that way it protects you against much more advanced attacks. And the one we use, of course, is Microsoft Defender XDR. The entire package, it protects your identities through Defender for Identity and Entra ID protection, your endpoints through Defender for Endpoints, Defender for IoT, Defender Vulnerability Management, and Defender Threat Intelligence. You have your email collaboration that goes to Defender for Office 365, your SaaS apps that goes to Defender for Cloud Apps, and your data to Microsoft DLP and Purview, and of course, cloud, very important, to Defender for Cloud. Defender XDR also tries as different possibilities to prevent attacks, mostly attack surface related. Think about browser isolation, so attacks through your browser aren't as clear to get through. Or ASR rules, so attack surface reduction rules, for example, blocking USB devices. It can also protect your endpoints, of course, and automatically remediate them, for example, automatically blocking an account or disabling accounts or isolating an endpoint. And of course, the detect and response part, where it goes more to detecting incidents or suspicious behavior as quickly as possible and responding to them automatically as quickly as possible. As of that, it also has the Microsoft API, which makes it very easy should you need to use it to connect to other services. Now, Microsoft has also combined this all in a unified platform. It has made sure that everything, so your SIEM and XDR that I explained before, also get put together with posture or posture management to get your vulnerabilities in view, your attack path, and everything around that. Also threat intelligence, so it's much easier and much quicker to see certain malicious IPs that have been accessed, suspicious domains, and it generally enriches your data. And at last, of course, there's also some AI added to it through automations, AI enhanced features, and generative AI. Now, as SecWise, as a security partner, how can we help you with this? First of all, expertise is a big important one. We work with these tools every single day. We are Microsoft certified, so we are very quickly with it, or very quickly to operate it, install it, which means the cost efficiency obviously goes up, so it's more efficient because we can do it way quicker. You don't need to train certain people. We can also advise and train you in it, so everything just goes quicker and more cost efficient. And data protection, of course, as said earlier, this also helps with your NIS2 directives. And of course, proactive threat detection. We also do have a SOC as a service, but there is a little bit more in a later slide. So how do we approach this? Generally, we work in 3 different phases. The first one is the Defender XDR phase, where we generally implement Defender for Identity, Cloud Apps, Ultra65, and Defender for Endpoint. Now, this can be chosen very granularly. If for, let's say, you only want to implement Defender for Identity, that's no problem. Then we only help with Defender for Identity. Perfectly fine. You don't need to choose every single thing. Phase 2 goes to Microsoft Sentinel, where we will help your Sentinel design and governance. So where in your Azure do you place it? How do we do it? How do we separate it from the operational logs? We will also onboard basic log sources with cloud native connectors, and onboard the XDR connector, and onboard the endpoint logs. So everything from your clients to your server endpoint logs. Of course, in phase 3, then we go to your third-party sources. The most important part of your SIEM, in this case Sentinel, is that you can get everything into it. So your firewalls, third-party EDRs or XDRs, remote access solutions, it doesn't really matter. It can go all into Sentinel. Microsoft itself has 300 connectors already made, but even if there isn't a connector, we can still find a way to get it into Sentinel. Now, you don't also need to take all 3 phases. For example, you only want us to install your Sentinel and add third-party resources, perfectly possible as well. And at the end, we will make sure that during these phases, you will have workshop trainings, so you also know the products and know how to work with them. So in that case, at the end of the project, if we then make sure that it's managed by you, or you choose it, nope, we're going to manage it, it's fine like this, then you still know how the product works. But another option is you join the SecWise Watch, which is a SOC as a service and a managed detection and response service. More info about this will be in our next webinar on the 6th of May. Now, generally, to go through the timeline real quickly, for a full Defender XDR setup, it is 1 to 2 weeks. For the Sentinel setup with basic connector, we take 1 week, and Sentinel ingestion endpoints, so the ingestion of the endpoint logs 1 week, and third-party logs just goes onwards, because that depends how much logs, of course, you want to implement. Again, this is, you can choose this very granularly. If you only want the Sentinel setup, it will take 1 week, for example. So very granular. Now I'm going to try to quickly go over a customer reference case. So this customer, first and foremost, is a service provider. It also does consultancy, and it has around 200 employees. Now, its challenges were, of course, the NIS2 compliancy. It also had a lot of third-party tools that needed to be in Sentinel to get a clear overview and as much visibility as possible. And they also had too many portals, so it was really difficult to have a clean overview and to manage all the alerts. Later on, they also joined our Watch or our SOC as a service. So how did we do this? First and foremost, there is an initial assessment, where we take a look at how is everything implemented at the moment and how can we go, or what can be better. Here we will highlight the risks and priorities and present you a security roadmap. In the second phase, we will analyze the workloads and create a detailed work breakdown structure so you can see how much time everything takes. In the third phase, we will implement, and the fourth phase, we gave them the support services, so the watch and the care service, which is our security support. Then finally, here we can see the entire architecture of their Sentinel. We will go through it and we will highlight some pieces to let you know how it works. First and foremost, everything on-premise from your AD related, so your domain controllers, ADFSs, certificate authorities, and interconnect servers, get connected through Microsoft Defender for Identity. Everything Microsoft 365 related goes through Microsoft Defender for Office 365. Your endpoints, in this case, it was only the clients. The service I will explain a little bit later on, were onboarded through Defender for Endpoint, and the SaaS and PaaS apps, if it's other or third party, will go through Defender for Cloud apps. We also, of course, have our Azure logs. Think about everything SQL, your VMs in Azure, Azure DNS, Key Vault, everything you can need. We implemented through Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and through Defender for Cloud, we can easily connect it through the Cloud Native Connector into Microsoft Sentinel. And then lastly, as said earlier, there were a lot of third-party log sources that needed to be onboarded into Microsoft Sentinel. In this case, we will help you with that. We will onboard the third-party resources. We can even make some analytic rules if necessary. Think about here, we onboarded ServiceNow, Cisco ASA, the vCenter, Veeam, Ansible Tower, GitHub. Those are some of the sources we already did. But as said earlier, you can literally send everything to Sentinel that is necessary or that it can help improve your security overview. Lastly, we also needed to implement Semantic because the licenses were still running on their servers, but they didn't want to migrate to Defender for Endpoint until the licenses were expired. So in this case, we onboarded Semantic to third-party connector into Microsoft Sentinel. We also want to make clear here that you don't need Defender XDR or Defender for Endpoint to take your Sentinel. If you have a Sentinel 1 or anything else, we can also implement it to get everything into Sentinel. It doesn't have to be Microsoft related at all. So in that case, I'm going to give the word back to Jethro to conclude.
Yes, so you may be wondering, okay, with all of this nice information, SecWise, what do you do? Why do you exist? And I always say we exist so you have peace of mind. Okay, so you may be wondering at the security challenge, like how can I do this? Or you want to add and upgrade the security activities. For example, you don't have a 24/7 SOC, you still at ad hoc or best practice, let's say, or best effort. You need a 24/7 SOC. We can add that security capability to your organization. And we also provide training and helping you. So those are the flavors, just advice, helping you implement, or let's say the 24/7 service. Those are why we exist, to have peace of mind in the security space. All right, let's move. Oh, I gotta take control back again. Here we go. So with that said, oh, by the way, one last thing I would really like, we are MISA, I don't know if you know MISA, the Microsoft Intelligent Security Association, which is invite only. Microsoft takes the top few hundred companies, security companies in the world and invites them to join this. I call it the elite club, and we're part of that for the MSSP flavor. So meaning we are top notch and we know our game. So we have lots of experience in all these different environments and sectors, so that is clear. And now I want to give the word to Bert. Any questions from the Q&A? I think I see one that we still have to answer.
Yes, there was one you already liked. The NIS2 compliance, which tools do you recommend for managing policies, risks, and controls?
Yes. Do you see Excel as a valid starting point, or would you suggest
Yeah.
other platforms? Great question, Nico. So first of all, NIS2 does not state, tools and technologies. It's neutral, right? It does state you need to have a kind of an ISMS, right? Now, um, the answer is it depends on the complexity and culture of the organization, right? But here are the best principles. First of all, the policies need to be published and centralized. They need to be accessible for the right range and scope of people. Some policies are company-wide, so they need to be accessible easily. That's number one. Number two, they need to be tracked with updates. So they need to be versioned, and you need to know who signed those policies, right? So when you have those in mind, centrally and publicly, I mean, within the organization available, with continuous updates, let's say, so you know the version and you know who signed off on those policies. That's what it needs to support. Many organizations use like a Jira or Confluence, or even a SharePoint. That's fine if that matches the culture. I don't recommend any other specific tools or software. I think start with what you have as long as you comply to those three principles, and that's great to start. Were there any other questions, Bert?
Yes, there was one from Katrien. We are a party building SaaS software for other customers. Would you advise to have a separate SIEM for internal IT infrastructure Office 365 and a separate one for the customer applications?
Thibaut, I pass that one to you, or even Bert if you want to answer that one.
Well, I think for sure that you probably should separate customer-related stuff to your own environment. I think generally, I'm not sure about this, but I think generally for GDPR-related stuff, that is probably the better way to go.
Yeah, as long as, so from a NIS2 perspective, if you are a SaaS provider, meaning you build software that your consumers just use on, let's say, your hosted platform, right? So it's not an on-premise thing, but you are hosting your software. It also depends on what type of entity you are, right? Are you in scope? And then are you an essential or an important provider? So that makes a distinction as well. And by the way, let's say that you are an important entity, then the question will come for your customers, are you providing a critical service for them? So are you part of their critical process? Right? If so, they will start pushing requirements to you. So just like we had GDPR, what was it, 2018? At the time, I was a product manager at a SaaS company, right? All of a sudden, I start getting calls from our big clients. Hey, are you GDPR compliant? You are part of our, business process, which is essential. And so they pushed requirements to us, and we as a SaaS provider had to comply with those requirements. So I would expect something similar for you, Katrien, that your clients will start pushing security requirements on you if you are an important SaaS provider for them.
And then we have a new question, more for Jethro, I think. About compliance, we are an essential company, so we need to compliance to all points. Accordingly to Siphon, we need to have a proxy server for our website, but our website is hosted by us. Any comments on that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't have any specific comments at the moment, so let us take a look and we'll reply to you. We have your email address, Hans, and we'll give you some advice there. But great question.
I think this was the last one.
All right, then with that said, 2 minutes before the 4 o'clock deadline, thank you very much for joining our webinar. Our next webinar will be more on the SOC and the Sentinel, more in detail, which is planned. Help me out, guys. Was it next month?
The 6th of May.
The 6th of May. Okay, 6th of
Yes.
so May 6th. You're going to get another invite. And also, we're going to send you the slides in the next few days. If you have other questions, feel free to reach out. You can reply to that email you're going to get from us. We're happy to help you out. With that said, have a wonderful afternoon. It's beautiful weather here in Belgium. Enjoy and see you next time.